Hello, Simone. I am excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be talking about Zohran Mamdani, who won the election overwhelmingly. I don't know if you saw, but he won to such an extent where even if the Republican candidate hadn't been running, he still would have won. He won with over 50% of the vote.
58%, right? A lot.
Just something like that. Yeah, like a lot. And this, when I saw this, and when I saw a lot of election wins among Democrats, which I didn't expect them to win as strongly as they did this cycle, especially among the more communist-leaning branch of Democrats, it was sort of like a wake-up call for me, as I've seen Zohran Mamdani as kind of like a joke, right? Like, oh yeah, he's going to screw up New York, you know, typical lefty nonsense, bunch of dumb policies. But I never really took the time to attempt to understand where he was, what he came from, what he stands for in terms of how politics are going to shift in this country.
Will the brain bug reveal? Federal scientists are working around the clock to probe its secrets. Once we understand the bug, we will defeat it.
Because as I pointed out in the episode, now that the Gazan war is over, right? Now that environmentalism is over, and like we'll do an episode on that where even Bill Gates, I don't know if you saw this recently, but he put out a thing being like the Gates Foundation is no longer going to focus on environmentalism in the same way. Basically, like Greta said it's over, the Gates Foundation said it's over, environmentalism is done. So I'm like, now that they don't have environmentalism, now that they don't have the Gaza war, now that trans people seem to be on the outs, even with progressives, what does progressive move to next? What does a cause move to next? And Simone hypothesized in that video, they're gonna move towards communism. They're going to move towards forcible wealth redistribution and authoritarian control of governments. And I heard that and I was like, oh, come on, Simone, that's a silly hypothesis. But then I looked at the love that Zohran is getting and I'm like, I might have a smart wife.
I know, man. Yeah, who has bladder control problems and good predictive powers? This lady. Ha ha!
From the pregnancy when you have kids.
You laugh and you pee. You sneeze and you pee. You run and you pee.
Well, you've got a giant baby in you. You don't have as much room for organs or storage. But anyway, you're not making pregnancy sound very... We're supposed to be selling pregnancy to our audience here, Simone.
Yeah, well, you don't want to sugarcoat it either. It's a very common thing.
But anyway, so no, but or maybe I should be scared that you can model them so well. Maybe you still have that urban monoculture in your mind.
I 100% do, and everyone who watches this podcast knows that. I serve as the de facto representative.
The medium. What are the ghosts saying? How are they speaking? What's happening next?
I have to see
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think I was wrong to not be as certain about it, and I want to understand this guy, okay? And understand him without the hyperbole and without the histrionics that you often get when right-leaning people are talking about him or his policies. Because I think there's some aspects of him when I went through and studied his history and past that are hugely oversold. The biggest one being just how socialist he is.
Oh.
He's really not as socialist as you would expect. He's more just like a normal Democrat plus. The one that is undersold is how it's very clear his goal is to turn the world into an Islamic state.
Wait, what? Okay, so that's the undersold part. Oversold is his socialism. Oh, phew. Undersold. Islamic State? What?
Yeah, it's his extreme solidarity with terrorist organizations, terrorist actors, and terrorist-related goals, often tied towards Muslims in increasing their population to the point where they control governments. And it makes sense when you look at his background. So if we're going to go into his background here and why he wouldn't see this as a negative thing, right? So he was born on October 18th, 1991. By the way, does that make you sad? He's born in the 90s.
He's a child.
He's in his 30s, but still, that makes me feel so old because I remember when people would date girls born in their 90s, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's cradle robbing. That's like too young."
Yeah,
and that was just like Zohran Mamdani. In Kampala, Uganda, Mamdani is the only child of prominent parents. His father, Mohammed Mandani, is a renowned academic in post-colonial studies, and his mother, Mira Nair, is an acclaimed filmmaker for works like Monsoon Wedding and The Namesake. Both parents are
Monsoon Wedding?
Monsoon Wedding, yes.
She made Monsoon Wedding? Damn.
So yeah, he was very wealthy growing up.
Wow. That was a really big hit. I mean, it's a great movie. I listened to the soundtrack constantly when I was a kid. Damn.
Both parents are of Indian descent. His father, a Gujarati Muslim born in Bombay, now Mumbai, and raised in Uganda, with family roots in Indian diaspora across the Southeast Africa, and his mother, a Punjabi Hindu from Rakhlani, India, whose own mother founded the Salam Balaka Trust for Child Welfare. Again, Mandani holds dual Uganda U.S. citizenship, naturalized in 2018, and identifies as a Shia Muslim of the Twelver branch. His middle name, Kawar, honors Kawar Nakmur, Ghana's first president, reflecting his family's Pan-African leanings. Oh, and one thing we're going to get into this, which I find pretty interesting, it's despite his incredibly sort of Islamist goals, his Islamist goals are seen through the lens of urban monoculture sort of communist agenda, like the people like like university campuses and stuff like that. Not directly like terrorists, but in the way that they will like, you know, glaze terrorists. But,
I mean, but if it's urban monoculture Islamism, isn't it just urban monoculture with a hijab?
No. I mean, it's calling for a global intifada. Like it's and we'll get into what that means in the context of that.
Okay.
But in the context of what it would mean to him, because what I want to go over now, it's like what his dad actually studied, what his dad actually wrote, so you can get an idea of the ideas that he was drenched in. But what I was going to say is later we're going to talk about how even they've been able to get support from Hasidic Jewish communities and leaders.
I've seen the endorsements. It's crazy.
Why would these groups be supporting him? And I think it is out of what people often forget is that these communities are, one, in vulnerable positions within where they are in Manhattan, and two, they are often anti-Zionists and want the Jewish state to be eliminated. And so people forget that for religious reasons, and I won't go too deep into that. I might do another episode on that.
Chime into the comments if you want it.
But on this one, Mandani was the author of influential books such as Citizen and Subject, which introduced the concept of the bifurcated state in colonial governance, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, When Victims Become Killers, and Neither Settler Nor Native.
So it's like the Muslim version of Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yes. But I wanted to understand so what is like Neither Settler or Native about? Like, what is the mind space that this guy is in, right?
Okay, yeah.
It argues that the modern nation state born from colonialism and nationalism inherently creates permanent minorities through the exclusion of certain groups, leading to violence, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. Mandani traces political modernity back to 1492 with the Reconquista in Spain and European colonization of the Americas, rather than the Treaty of Westphalia. He critiques the settler-native binary imposed by colonialism, distinguishing settlers who arrive with a nationalist agenda from immigrants who seek shared homelands without exclusivity. The book calls for decolonialization by depoliticizing identity, rejecting criminal justice approaches to mass violence, like trials with entrenched divisions, and instead fostering an equal citizenship among quote-unquote survivors who recognize their shared colonialization. All right. So can you sort of begin to picture what this guy, like what his view of his own role is in society and what his view of how society works? He sees America as a colonialist state by individuals who are not natives, right? They immigrated into this country with a nationalist agenda from Europe. And this is not, factually untrue. Like I can see how.
I mean, America was created by exactly that type of population, people coming from other places to build a city upon a hill, their vision of a better world.
Right. Now, it's important to remember, if I was to critique his views, I would say, well, what you're forgetting is that America was made up of a bunch of Native American tribes that were constantly murdering each other and taking each other's land. And not only that, but there were other native populations that had come from entirely different genetic waves that we're now aware of, that the Native Americans that we encountered when we arrived here had completely genocided before taking over the region. So They had genocided the previous population, taken their land. We then came into the country, and they were constantly fighting with each other and taking each other's lands. And when we came into the country, what the normative standpoint of Native Americans was, oh, there's a bunch of European groups coming in here who all seem to hate each other. Let's see if we can play them off each other to kill off the groups who we hate, right? Like this idea of native versus colonist was not what was actually happening at the time of colonization. Now, I'm not saying what happened to Native Americans wasn't absolutely terrible. It was probably the worst thing to happen to any group if we're talking about like discriminated groups in the world. But in some ways, the sort of UBI that was created for them through things like the casino programs and stuff like that, and we've talked about this in other episodes, did a huge amount of damage to them as well, right? Mm-hmm. So even the attempts to give them restitution have caused them a great deal of suffering, because as we've pointed out, restitution generally hurts the groups it's given to and causes that's a different episode. But okay, in his mind, what's happened is America is a state that is created when European colonialists come over here. And then you have the survivor class of people. All right. So the survivor class of people is made up of two groups. All right. It's made up of the actual native population. Right.
Okay. Yes.
And then it's made up of anyone who voluntarily immigrates to the country who isn't white, broadly speaking. So this would be Indians, this would be Arabs, this would be Africans, this would be anyone like him is in this survivor group because he would see his native environments as being disrupted by colonialism. You know, it's what they always blame whenever their countries go bad. And I point out all the time that there are lots of places where colonialism happened and they are doing really well these days. And there are lots of places where colonialism happened that are doing terrible these days. And there are lots of places where colonialism never happened, and they typically do more similar to the places with similar cultures to them where colonialism did happen and are doing bad than to the places without a similar culture to them where colonialism didn't happen. So like as an example of this, Ethiopia was never colonized.
Okay.
But Ethiopia is much closer, you know, economically in terms of the struggles that they're facing as a country to the culturally similar countries that were colonized than it is to, let's say, Asian countries that were colonized, which are often much more similar to each other than they are to African countries that were colonized. So the point here, or Native American countries that were colonized, or, you know, South American countries that were colonized. And so the point I'm making here is colonialization doesn't seem to define a country's end state. It appears what plays the bigger role in defining their end state is the population that is running that country or the majority in that country.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily mean this from a genetic standpoint. I might mean it from a cultural standpoint, right? Where I'm saying, you know, the colonialist outcomes across Latin America are very similar. The colonialist outcomes across Africa are generally fairly similar. And the colonialist outcomes across Asia are pretty similar, but they're all radically different from each other. And it's not necessarily that there were different colonial systems in those areas, because the colonial systems differed more from each other based on which country was colonizing the country, not based on where that country was in the world. Or okay. As much. Anyway, sorry, big tangent there. But what I'm trying to do is explain that in his worldview, he is part of this victim class that has a mandate to take back the colonialist countries from the settlers. The whites, basically. And this helps understand better when I was talking about like the weird ideology that Greta Thunberg had moved into and stuff like that, right? Trying to understand what she meant when she said colonialism is the reason for environmentalist problems, right? Or what they mean by Israel as a colonialist state, right? Like
it's really more like capitalistic white people.
Not exactly. So let's look at the case of Israel, right? If you're looking at Israel with, I think, any sort of an honest historical lens, the Jews were displaced from their land by imperial systems that made it very unpleasant to live there. So colonizers came into their country, took it over, displaced them, and then they came back, the native people of this land, and retook the land from people who are often provably not native populations. And I was always confused. Like, how can you say that they're the colonizers, right? Right. Like that seemed very, but it makes perfect sense if you go to the logic of Mandami's father. Okay. So if you go to the logic of Mandami's father, being a colonist is defined by the idea of nationalism for your state or land, right? So the Jews having a state, and a state that is theirs to the exclusion of any random person that wants to migrate into it, right? They are the ultimate colonists in his mind. Now, obviously, none of this makes sense if you look anywhere else in the world, like Asia, right? But if you're looking at it from this very narrow lens of like Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and the United States and Latin America, this worldview can make sense. But now it makes sense to you why Mandani, when he sees people out there, you know, murdering Jewish people, or he calls for a global intifada, which he has called for.
He has, okay.
Fatadas, what they were was times in Israel's history when people rose up, the Arabs was in Israel, or the Muslims was in Israel, and started murdering Jewish people to try to take back the state.
So wait, sorry, I'm really not actually that well versed on the term intifada. What is the difference between an intifada and a pogrom?
Well, okay, so this is the way they would describe the difference.
Okay.
I don't think that they are actually technically that different. A pogrom, they would say, is when Jews were living in a non-Jewish state and the king or ruler of that state decided that they would eliminate the minority Jewish population.
Okay. Whereas an intifada is when the Jewish is the majority population.
Yeah, with the Jews as a majority population and you attempt to eliminate them. But remember, if you hear, like, because I've been listening to more Nick Fuentes stuff recently to try to understand his perspective on things, and he talks about talking points that I can only guess he's getting from people like this about like global Jewry and everything like that.
Oh, you actually nailed it. Yeah.
So no, but I'm really trying to understand them from their own perspective.
I just checked on AI for those not. You see, I'm beginning to get Mandani brain. I'm beginning to understand how all of this makes sense to him. No. The intifada versus pogrom.
Yeah, but the reason I'm able to explain this to you, even though I haven't read this, is because I'm beginning to understand where he's coming from. And when you understand where he's coming from and where the people who are like him are coming from, you can understand why before I got into pronatalism, I started having kids. I remember somebody who hated me on Facebook sent me a thing saying I was colonizing the world with my white sperm. And
that's
I was like,
right. Yes, you were.
What are they talking about? If you have this mindset, all of a sudden it makes sense. The very concept of the nationalist nation state and the idea of like an English identity or a French identity or a Jewish identity or an American identity, the very reason why you can't have this, right, is he says that we should have a globalist survivor identity. And the survivor identity is anyone who was displaced by the colonialist system, i.e. anyone who migrated for economic opportunity in one of the countries that the colonialists made economically prosperous. It's not like he was forced to move here. He moved here because he wanted economic opportunities, but that's not the way he reframes it. He reframes it as those economic opportunities were taken from him because of colonialism, and therefore he has a right to come and take them within other environments. But this also shows you why they're so pro-immigration and so pro-mass immigration, right? Because they believe that the survivors have a mandate to move into these environments.
I see. Okay. Survive. Wow. What a thing.
Okay, so sorry. In this kind of cool when you see this, right? Like I now am beginning to see where they're coming from. So we'll go further with his beliefs and his politics here, okay?
Okay, yeah, please.
Actually, any thoughts, Simone? Does this help you understand? Do you have any new feelings about where leftists are going when you understand this colonialist architecture and mindset?
It kind of scares me. Because it digs deeper into identity politics and specifically establishes things as a function of us versus them in a way that is kind of arbitrary.
Well, no, but it's actually, I think it helps people understand better who's gonna get murdered here, basically.
Well, we certainly want to know that.
there's a lot of people who will go out there and be like, well, I'm Jewish, so I'm a minority, right? Like my people clearly face discrimination. Look at the Holocaust.
Mm.
And somebody with this mindset would say, no, you're Jewish. You're actually a super white person. You're like an extra white person because your people
Super
have
white. Remember super straight?
Right. No, but the point here being is that your classification as a discriminated individual is not downstream of the actual discrimination or trials that your people have faced. It is downstream of how economically prosperous your people have been able to make themselves within an existing system.
Mhm.
And what cultural background you came from. So it doesn't really matter, no matter how disabled, no matter how trans, no matter how gay. And I think a lot of people aren't realizing this yet within this mindset. You are never one of the survivors. Okay. The survivors are a few specific groups in their minds, right? They are people who are the descendants of natives. So they would likely categorize all Hispanics in this, even though this is not accurate, but it helps broaden their base. Anyone who's a descendant of Africans and anyone who's a descendant of Middle Easterners, maybe Indians as well. And you might be like, well, why not Asians? Like Asians underwent colonization as well. And they'd be like, well, the Asians, because Asians don't fit their pattern of colonization, i.e. they achieved economic prosperity after colonization, they don't count as a colonized people because the Asians then became nationalist. I mean, look at Japan, for example, look at China, for example, and actually take pride in their identity, not as a pan-discriminated group, but as a distinct ethnicity. They don't get to categorize themselves within this survivor class. I think a lot of people are simping for this movement here without understanding that they're on the chopping block.
Bro, literally first thing does the Elon Musk Nazi salute. He's saying the quiet part out loud. He wants to replace you, and you have to lock the schmibbles in.
New York will remain a city of immigrants.
We hate white people.
A city built by immigrants.
We hate white people.
Powered by immigrants.
The opposite of white power, immigrant power, I guess.
And as of tonight, led by an immigrant.
Yeah, he's basic.
So it's important to keep in mind when you hear this speech and you're thinking about what it means to him, remember all humans fall into one of two categories. They are either in the survivor category, which is an immigrant class led by Muslims, or they are in the colonizer category. The goal here in the United States is the same goal that they have within Israel. And there's a line that they often repeat, which is to, I think it goes, I'll try to find it in post to get the exact line. The line is, when Israel falls, the West falls. I.e., if they can eradicate Israel, then they can eradicate the rest of the West.
That's okay. Yeah, I get it.
This makes perfect sense. So let's explain what I mean here.
Yeah.
Okay. Why would somebody think this if they have this mindset, right? Look at Europe. Has Europe been able to stand against people with these mindsets? The answer is clearly no. It is completely captured at this point, and demographically, it really has no hope going into the future. Okay? The United States, has the United States been able to stand firm against this? We have stood more firm against this than Europe, but a lot of that could just be due to geography, right? What is the only place on Earth that has been able to stand against this while standing directly adjacent to this, right? It's Israel.
Yeah, there you go. That's true.
And not just is it Israel, think about it from their perspective, right? I am a radicalized terrorist Islamist, and I am in one of these countries around Israel, right? Now, I have dedicated myself to this global intifada mindset. Eventually, everyone needs to be under Sharia law. Okay. Now, I go and I say, I'm going to give up my life to bomb something, to attack something, to kill someone. Why on earth am I going to go halfway across the world to the United States or to Canada or to a country that's already basically falling, like Germany or something like that, when Israel's right on my doorstep and is a much more like big flag in terms of like my people, right? When Israel falls, all of the people who are now attacking Israel all of the people who get radicalized and are drawn to it like a magnet right now, think of it like the moon. You know how the moon like pulls in asteroids before they hit the earth, and we would be hit with so many more asteroids if the moon wasn't orbiting us? That's what Israel is for radicalized individuals with this mindset. It pulls in the terrorists like a bug zapper, and then they deal with it in a way that is useful to us. But I think that we in the United States, or even within Europe, don't realize how much of like the people who get radicalized in these environments, when Israel's gone, they're still getting radicalized, but they're now going for a much wider distribution of targets in a way where I just don't think a lot of these other countries or institutions would be able to stand on their own very well.
Okay. Fascinating.
It is fascinating because so much makes sense to me. This is why Greta Thunberg, because this is her mindset as well. Like a lot of her words have seemed weird to me. Why doesn't
it make any sense? Like, what does
why doesn't she care that there's a genocide that was literally twice as big happening in where was it again? The DRC, Darfur, yeah. And she didn't say a thing about it. She didn't do a thing about it.
Yeah, but that because it's totally unmoored from this.
It's unmoored from this. In that case, it was Muslims killing blacks for being black. That is irrelevant. That undermines the survivor narrative because it's two survivor populations killing each other.
So they cancel each other out in the equation. So it's not germane to this.
Yes. Okay. So he spent his early years at Kampala until 5, and then the family moved to Cape Town, South Africa, his father's teaching position at the University of Cape Town. There he attended St. George's Grammar School. At 7, they relocated to New York City's Morningside Heights neighborhood. He grew up in a relatively privileged environment. He's described it as one where he never had to want for something, but he was conscious of the broader inequalities. In 2003, during his father's sabbatical, he returned to Kampala for a year, attending school with support from the extended family. Back in NYC, he played soccer for the local leagues and co-founded a cricket team for his high school, and even ran unsuccessfully for student body vice president. Now, the next thing I want to get into is his rap career, because I think that this has been fairly and unfairly maligned. If you actually look at his rap videos, they're cute, right? Like he'll do a rap video about like his grandmother or something like that, right? And I think that was the most viral one that he did. And it's about like his grandmother working at a Chinese like grocery store or something like that. 85 years old, 85 years old, 85 years with my family on my back, so I'll outlast everybody on my fucking haters. Don't know me now, then you never know me later. Say, I be in an elevator to the top, go and find your own way there. Drinking a little water ball for me by my way there. Right?
Cute. Okay.
Goes viral, cute, whatever. But he's had some lines in his songs that might help you understand what I mean when I talk about like what his actual long-term agenda is, okay?
Okay.
So in the 2017 track, Salam, described by Mandani as a song about growing up in New York, he raps, "My love to the Holy Land 5, you better look him up." The Holy Land 5 were leaders of the Holy Land Foundation, convicted in 2008 for funneling $12 million to Hamas. You know, that Hamas, the group that held
the other Hamas. Come on,
the
one that saves puppies.
You know, women and children in tunnels, raping them to death. That Hamas, okay? They faced charges of supporting terrorism, money laundering, and tax fraud, and were sentenced up to 65 years.
He's a fan.
Yeah. So he's a big fan of that. The song also included lines like "No ban, no wall, build it up, we'll make it fall." So again, remember I said the goal of these people is as many survivors into the country as possible. This is also why they freaked out when we began to get white refugees from South Africa. And aid organizations that had been working for like 17 years shut themselves down rather than serve just 40 white South Africans. And we have an episode about that. So it really shows it was not about people in dangerous situations. It was not even about like, we'll hold our nose and help some disadvantaged white people, you know, when it comes to that. It is, no, we are explicitly an anti-white organization. By the way, you know, 2 of the organizations that did this, by the way, if you're counting up who's our list of enemies, one was the Catholic charity for bringing over immigrants. The
Oh,
other
boy.
was the Episcopal charity for bringing over immigrants.
Oh, the Episcopal one.
With the Catholic one, it wasn't as obvious because they might have closed down for other reasons. With the Episcopal one, it was very clear that that's why they shut down.
Really?
This is why I'm very suspicious of high church organizations, right?
Specifically here, in May 2025, the Episcopal Church announced it would terminate its nearly 40-year partnership with the U.S. government for refugee resettlement through the Episcopal Migration Ministry Services, rather than comply with the Trump administration directive to help white people. And then, in terms of the Catholic Church, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the USCCB, ended its National Refugee Resettlement Program in April 2025. However, this could be argued that they did this because of the administration cancellation of grants instead of the Afrikaners, so it's more iffy there. But it's very explicit with the Episcopal Church. It is just wild to me that they would cancel a 40-year program just to not help some, I think it was like 45 white people. And I think that people need to be really aware, and this is why I've been hitting on this so hard recently, is this, well, they're Christians, therefore they're on our side, is a very bad way to look at things, because there are many large Christian organizations that are dedicated to your eradication, even if they don't understand that that is the result of the ideology that their masters are writing for them. Side note, though, it's not just many Christian organizations. There are also Jewish organizations, which we will get to in a bit. But it's important to understand that just because a group is Christian or Jewish does not mean that they are on your side. But there are few people on earth who serve the goal of this agenda more thoroughly than individuals like Nick Fuentes, who is trying to paint the two sides that should be natural allies against each other, and then side with regularly the survivor class.
A lot of them become institutionally captured without realizing at the lower levels or even at the upper levels that the bureaucratic level has this level of capture, right?
Okay.
So glorification of violence and gun hypocrisy. In 2016 video, Wabala Nawe, set during the 1981 Uganda Bush War in the Lavero Triangle, Mandani, as young cardamom, appears in military fatigues, brandishing a handgun amid a scene of gunfiring militants shooting from trucks and point-blank execution. Lyrics include violent threats, like "I'll finish you like food on a plate." "You are about to run like a chicken. You'll pray for death." This has been contrasted with his claiming anti-gun stance. Hold on. I want to hear about this conflict. Who versus who was this? But I want to make it clear, he is open to, like, well, he might say, oh, I'm anti-gun, I'm anti-whatever. It's very clear that he feels that when groups that he identifies as a survivor class gain enough power within an environment, it is now okay to glorify the execution of civilians and stuff like that. And this is something that, he has glazed Hamas before. He has glazed terrorists before. This is not a
glazed supporters of Hamas, to be specific here.
Well, he's never condemned anything that Hamas has done except the explicit events of October 7th. Well, not surprising. It just seems to have been black on black violence in Africa.
Oh, that's surprising.
Well, I mean, that's not surprising. I'm surprising that
that's why blood is seen from Google Earth now or whatever, right?
No, but what I'm saying is I'm surprised that he would take so much glee in the executions of what are presumably other survivors. I guess it's just any group that's resisting is allowed to use violence however they want in his mind, regardless of who they're attacking. But anyway, so he entered into politics under a group called the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA. Now, they have been increasingly taking over the Democratic Party. They've got like AOC in their camp. They've got Bernie in their camp. That's where they really began to grow. And they have a fairly explicit socialist agenda, which we'll get to in a second. But right now, I want to focus more on the intifada stuff, right?
Yes, I'm very curious to learn more about that.
So during a 2025 interview, so recently, this isn't like something he said when he was a kid, he defended the phrase globalizing Fatah as symbolizing a desperate desire for equality and equal rights, standing for Palestinian human rights. Now, the thing is that is not what it means, right? Like in context. So
I feel like if we're looking at this in a very divorced, non-ideological way, the best way to maximize Palestinian rights is to get rid of the entire Palestinian government and have Israel run everything.
absolutely.
That's
No,
they're going to get
this
good
is like a
infrastructure,
captured-
good social services. It would be great. I mean,
anyone
I think
who
all of
looks-
us really want. In fact, this is a common criticism made by people who really don't like the money that we're giving to Israel. It's like, well, what's this? Like, you know, Israel gives has all these great social services, gets free IVF, and we're giving them money for weapons. What's up with this? And it's like, yeah, wouldn't it be great then if Israel at least extended all of these wonderful services to Palestine? Oh, well, guess what? If we just get rid of Palestine and make all of it Israel, we can. Like, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, well, also keep in mind that within Israel, you know, Arabs have a very good life within Israel.
I guess, are you a Muslim?
I'm Muslim, yeah.
What's it like living in Jerusalem as a Muslim?
It's a holy place.
It's a holy place.
Yeah.
It's okay, no problem.
No problem.
No problem.
As a Muslim living in Israel, what's it like?
Good.
It's good.
Yes.
So you as a Muslim, growing up here, we're in the Muslim quarter. Have you faced discrimination, unfair treatment, or?
No, I don't feel nothing. I feel safe.
Israel left Gaza in 2005, meaning in 2005 there was no Jew alive or dead in Gaza. They even took the graves with them. It was ethnical cleansing of the Jews. Thousands of families forcefully uprooted from Gaza. And it was a test case for self-governing Gaza. Here, Gaza, we give you the keys to the greenhouses, we're leaving everything. You're free, become a state. And the sentiment in Israel during that time, I remember it because I was 15 back then, was a lot of hope that now Gaza is going to become the Singapore of the Middle East. And we were talking about the high-rises buildings that you saw that Gaza has. But what actually happened is that Hamas burned all the greenhouses, not giving the Palestinians the opportunity of economic prosperity. And then they got elected a few months later in democratic elections to become the sovereign government of Gaza. And once they got elected, they killed everyone who didn't agree with them.
It is, even when contrasted, the Arab settlements I saw in Israel, even when contrasted with the ones I saw in the UAE outside of major cities, were nicer and wealthier, which is absolutely wild to me. I think that there are very few places on earth where Arab majority populations live that well. And so, you know, I think you might be onto something with that, but that's a whole other thing. Nobody's going to go for that because that's not really the point of the fight. The reason why nobody cheered when the war ended was because they wanted the war to keep going, right? Like all these college protesters and stuff like that. I saw no parades when the war ended, right? Because that wasn't the goal. The goal was not ending the genocide as they claimed. It was a separate goal altogether, and we know what that was, right? But I'll note here, when he talks about a, you know, desire for equality and equal rights, clearly he's just like washing this out here, because if you look what the term intifada is typically used to talk about is the 1987 to 1993 intifada. This was the major Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. It began spontaneously after a traffic accident in Gaza, but grew to widespread protests, strikes, boycotts, and clashes. Palestinians used stones, Molotov cocktails, and barricades, while Israeli forces responded. There was 1,000 Palestinian deaths and 100 Israeli deaths. So again, like, I don't even know why basically it was a huge uprising attempting to take back the state, and they just got curb stomped for it. The second time it happened was the Al-Aqsa Intifada, 2000 to 2005, sparked by Ariel Sharon's visit to the Al-Aqsa mosque compound. This one was more violent and had more suicide bombings and shootings. It had around 3,000 Palestinians died and around 1,000 Israelis died. And keep in mind, this is like a peaceful state. Like, this is not a state where people are facing like overwhelming, you know, discrimination or anything like that. It is one of the usually better places they can live given their demographic background. Now, he's said that he's called Israel's occupation of Gaza a genocide. And it says it's a system of hierarchy based on race and religion. That's the way he described the Jewish state. and he wants an eradication of the Jewish state. Now, if you look at on the Baraj Mossad demolition of BJP's role, he posted on X about the 1992 demolition, stating, "This is the photo of the Baradi Majari in 1992 is destroyed in a riot instigated by the BJP, now India's ruling party. On Sunday, Hindu nationalists wanted to celebrate the atrocity in NYC. Will Mayor Adams let them? He accused the BJP of instigating violence and opposed celebrations in NYC." So note here, he is fighting not just basically wherever Muslims have in any way been wronged, he considers this like a major issue for him. Mandani called Modi a war criminal who, quote, helped to orchestrate the mass slaughter of Muslims in Gujarat during the 2022 riots. Gujarat, yes. He falsely claimed Muslims were eradicated in Gujarat during the 2002 riots, exaggerating the events. So, you know, he's going out there. This isn't just in our country, right? Like he wants, if you're like, what does he want to happen in India, right? Clearly, there is a group in India that he wants controlling the country, and it's not the group that's controlling the country right now. That seems to be fairly clear, who he would categorize as genocidal for doing things like putting down riots, right? Now, let's talk about what's the organization called? The Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA.
Ah, yes. Okay, yes.
So obviously they're super, super pro-Palestine. They're super, super big into this armed struggle and decolonization and from
which is so odd because it's like not. When I hear that, I think, okay, well, this is about socialism. We're going to talk about economic policy. We're going to talk about industrial policy. And even when I heard him talking in an interview about what socialism is to him, he says it's about human dignity. And it's about that human dignity shouldn't be up to like private corporations. So when it comes to
so let's talk about what socialism is to the organization he's a part of. Okay. So if we go to their official website, we want to collectively own the key economic drivers that dominate our lives.
Right.
Such as energy, production, and transportation. Now,
but he also said that internet and childcare.
Yes. Well, these are his things. I'm talking about what the party wants. So he's trying to make like transportation free, which everyone has said this is a very bad thing. Like when you make buses free, which he wants to do, they typically become basically moving homeless shelters. And you do see this. Anyone who's ever lived in a city where these types of amenities are free, they become incredibly dangerous, you know, even when they aren't free in New York.
Yeah, even when they're not free. Yeah, you get
stabbings,
problems.
you get, very dangerous places. It is obviously going to put the citizens of New York at risk, even often the homeless individuals who are using it in this way, because it doesn't have the protection or the security of a normal homeless shelter because it's not designed for that, right? And so it's a very easy place for anybody who wants to abuse the system to operate from, right? Unless, you know, you put a cop on every bus or something like that. And certainly he doesn't want to do that. But also, if you look at the wider thing here, you see him beginning to implement these plans. But what happens when we socialize energy? You know, what happens when we socialize the internet? Now they have control over everything you're seeing and doing. They can shut down energy whenever they want to districts, which we've seen in these sorts of, you know, communist states. And in addition to that, it always just ends up crashing out. I mean, look at Venezuela, right? Venezuela was the model of how you were supposed to do socialism in the minds of groups like this until everything fell apart. Right?
Yeah.
The problem is you used to be able to be like, well, no one's doing communism right. People would be like, well, Venezuela is. Right. And then when it fell apart, it's like, oh, well,
again, communism works really well when you have like unlimited resources, which in various instances for short periods of time, it feels like that. And it quote unquote works for a while, but no.
Yeah, so to go forwards with what they have to say about themselves, socialists therefore argue that private corporate property is not only wrong, but also nonsensical. Wealth is a social creation and should be democratically administered. So this would mean essentially communism, right? If you're removing the concept of private corporations and investing in private corporations and them having wealth, then the only way you can get large scale projects like, you know, silicon fabs and stuff like that you need for cell phones and all the things that I'm sure even these people want in their lives is if the state manages it all. You can't have, you know, anarcho-capitalism or anarcho-communism and anything that looks like modern technology. That really only works with an agrarian society, because these fabs require tens of billions of dollars of investment. You can't get tens of billions of dollars by getting all the workers to like pool their money or something.
Yeah,
right?
they're not going to do it. Yeah, you either need to incentivize a very well-resourced person to do it by allowing them to make money from it, or you need the government to pay for it somehow.
But the moment that you have centralized power in that way under the state, you have now created the end state of the most horrifying libertarian system, which is a single company that controls everything. You are basically living on a company city, you know, that they used to have, where like the coal mine would own everything, right? Like that's the situation you're living under when you are in a state that owns all of the resources and directs all of the resources. So it's not just from an inefficiency perspective, it's even horrifying, often from the very perspective of the people who are fighting for it, when you point out that they have just described a company, one company running everything, right? So on housing, they say social housing must expropriate property from capitalists and deliver it to the working class, through which it may be sustained and rejuvenated. So what they believe that under this system, no individual can own multiple homes or profit from another's needs for shelter. Housing is permanently removed from the circuit of capital. This obviously has really, really bad effects on living quality within a region. We've talked about this before, but I've talked about this within the concept of monogamy and why monogamy is beneficial, which is to say, when you don't own your house, you have no reason to invest in your house or your property, right? And this is why if you go to many communist countries, you will see the single households that often would be pretty nice for these communist countries, just completely deteriorating in a complete state of, like, they look like trailer parks. All of them do. And if you go through a suburban neighborhood in America, everything looks pristine and nice. And that's because these people have no reason to invest in their property. It could just be assigned to anyone else at any day. But in the United States, you're keeping up the property so that you can sell it in the future, right? So you intrinsically have a motivation to continue to invest in it. I compared this to monogamy because I was like, well, this is what it means to be within a monogamous relationship.
So you can sell your wife eventually.
Yes. Now, to talk about Mandani, he wants to raise the corporate tax rate from 7.25% to 11.5%, matching New Jersey's. And he also wants to impose a flat 2% tax on incomes over 1 million. You can point out that, the top 1% of NYC is 40% of the tax revenue. And we're already seeing a spike in housing prices in Connecticut from people trying to get out of there. But historically, and there's been a lot of studies on this, raising taxes in like the 2.6 range doesn't tend to cause mass exoduses of wealthy individuals, right?
Interesting.
So that's not something we have to worry about as much. The bigger problem for him is probably what he wants to do in terms of expanding rent control, because this has very negative effects if you look at the studies. Expanding rent control and rent restrictions almost always actually increases the price to renters in the long term.
Well, and rent control is already a huge problem in New York City because it causes, it can be inherited. I think a lot of people don't realize that it can be passed down from generation to generation, meaning that you have intergenerational wealth essentially being entrenched. Like, it's very against what I would consider to be a more leftist view, right? That we don't want people to inherit privilege and wealth. And yet you have exactly that in New York City because of rent control. You have people who are benefiting from their grandparents, sometimes even their great-grandparents, buying or getting a rent controlled apartment from ages ago next to Central Park and just passing it down and down, meaning that people are holding on to these apartments because they've become these intergenerational assets, even when they don't need them, even when they primarily are living in other areas and not even
so now
really
what happens?
using them.
You move out of New York and you're keeping this apartment, right?
Yeah, and so you're holding up this inventory. And actually, one of our listeners sent to me a tweet showing the proportion of different types of New Yorkers that support Mamdani. And the biggest proportion of people that support him in terms of duration living in New York are people who lived in New York for the least amount of time. So those who've lived in New York or were born in New York are the least likely to support Mamdani. And those who've lived in New York 5 years or fewer are the most likely to support him. I think part of that's because he keeps promising, I'm going to make it easier for you to get housing here. Little do they know that his policies aren't going to make it easier to
you
get
need
housing.
more supply. The only way you get more supply is by removing rent control.
Yeah, another problem with rent control too is absolutely, there's a lot of apartments in New York City that are not currently being rented because they're not up to code. Why are they not up to code? Because the fixes needed to repair the apartments and make them up to code, to make them legally rentable again, are more expensive than what the landlord, the property owner, would be able to get in rent. So they would lose money doing anything to these apartments because they're never going to be able to get rent at a level that will pay for the costs of maintaining these apartments.
Yeah.
So again, this is only going to exacerbate the problem. But yeah, carry on.
So the other really big change that he wants to do is, well, the free childcare, which I'm actually okay with. New York has incredibly expensive childcare, and I really don't know how they're supposed to fix this. So if New Yorkers are subsidizing childcare for other New Yorkers, that's fine. The next one is raised to minimum wage, $30 an hour, where right now it's $16.50 an hour.
Wow, that's a big jump.
Yeah, that's going to have a big economic effect on what
people are
already
just
a lot of
shut
businesses
down.
Unviable.
It's already, I think, half or 40% at least of the pharmacies in New York City have closed down, largely because of theft. In the ones that remain, which are largely locked up, you have to ask someone to help you, get some, like a soda out of a locked fridge, for example. Even when we were there trying to do this a while ago on one trip, maybe 2 years ago, we had to wait forever to get someone to come out. Imagine if they double the cost of employees, it's going to be even worse. There's going to be like one person in every pharmacy staffing them. Like, I don't know, like, are we going to bring back automats or something with just, I mean, there are all these now automated.
That'd be really interesting if they did bring back automats.
There have been some like pilot versions of automats coming back. I really like automats, so I think
people who don't know what an automat is, it's this old system where you would go and you would pay, and then like there were a bunch of cubbies and one of them would like unlock and your meal would be in the cubby.
Yeah, it'd be like a sandwich in the cubby or some meatloaf in the cubby, and you just open it up and there it is. So it's like a vending machine, but for fully prepared meals. There is a kitchen behind the automat with people, but like, I think in a world in which crime and theft are higher, people paying to get food out of unlocked things, no table service, etc. Like, also it would make so much more sense in terms of the food delivery world, where, if you are Uber Eats, if you are Deliveroo, whatever, just being able to ride up on your bike and pick the thing out of the window for the person makes a lot of sense. So, but yeah, I mean, it is going to fundamentally change what New York looks like. I'm all, like, in the end, I think that where conservatives land on Mamdani is, I really like that he's gonna disrupt things and probably prove the point that what he's proposing doesn't work. What I'm seeing from my friends on the left, because most of my childhood friends, for example, very still quite progressive, Mamdani is very akin to what Trump was in 2016, which is, I don't think he has all the answers. I don't really know if he's going to make anything better, really, actually. But I do think he's going to cause a lot of disruption, and he's going to break a system that I hate. And what could possibly make the system worse, they think. So I think that
little do they know how bad.
But the weird thing is that in the end, both the right and the left are kind of like, yeah, this dude's going to break stuff. And it just happens to be from slightly different perspectives, where from one side, it's he's going to break stuff and I freaking hate it. So at least he's breaking things. And on the other side, he's going to break stuff and then you'll see how stupid you all are. Right. So like everyone kind of gets what they want by his being elected. Yeah. So it's a good day. It's a good day to be an American.
Well, I mean, I do want to see and report on New York's deterioration after this, because I think that, this is how we can fight this sort of growth within the leftist movement. And we're going to need to, because I suspect it's from this fraction that the next presidential candidate is going to come from on the left.
Yeah, we'll see.
And we need to be, especially if we're looking at this last primary, it's very worried about that. Now, if you want to know about the Hasidic community that supported him, this was Satmar Hasidic community, the Abraham faction. So they're led by Rabbi Aaron Teitelbaum. and Rabbi Moshe Indigi in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. They endorsed Mandani just days before the election. The Satmar, one of the largest Haredi ultra-Orthodox communities with over 57,000 members in Williamsburg alone, is known for its anti-Zionist ideology. They oppose the state of Israel on religious grounds, believing it should not exist before the arrival of the Messiah, and criticize its secular nature and military draft.
So they're those Jews. Okay.
They're those Jews, yeah.
Okay. Makes sense.
And they worked with him in exchange for protecting yeshivas. These are Jewish religious schools from secular scrutiny of education. And I can see him being okay with that because he just doesn't care, you know?
Yeah. Power to the people.
Well, no, power to the anti-Zionist Jews.
Well, yeah, the only
people. But I'd remind
no one else is human, Malcolm.
What's important to remember in all of this is, from their perspective, this survivor versus colonizer thing, the reason they're using the term colonizer is so that you don't really get that they're talking about you. They specifically mean white people, Asian people, and what they would see as Black collaborators, which are non-Muslim Blacks often. So that is why they do not care. That is why he is willing to celebrate the extrajudicial execution of Black people in Africa. That is why they don't care that there was a genocide happening twice as large as the one in Gaza, if you consider that a genocide, when it was Arabs killing Black people. So this is really a movement. And I think that and you know, Mandani shows this, Hassan shows this, where Muslims are at the top, and it is about an Islamic agenda at the end of the day. And that's really surprised me. When somebody starts talking about the colonizee stuff, they are talking about a larger Muslim agenda. And they may not realize it. Like, they may not realize that that's what this is all downstream from, but I hadn't fully realized that before. I thought that was more of a conspiracy. And I think it shows us why, you know, especially with this quote unquote civil war on the right now, I'm now more convinced than ever that the replatforming of Nick Fuentes on things like news articles and Tucker Carlson is probably tied to the CIA, just because there's so much evidence of Tucker Carlson being tied to the CIA at this point. And it does seem very weird when you consider that, like, Nick Fuentes' fan base actually isn't that large, you know, considering the amount of, and the issues that he's covering actually aren't that important. But I think that as the left becomes more actively anti-Semitic in their goals, they need to find a way to paint the right as still having a degree of anti-Semitism within it. And Nick Fuentes is the perfect person to do that for them.
So you're saying the CIA is orchestrating this, but the CIA is orchestrating this as an entity that is antagonistic toward the Trump administration and the new right's goals?
Well, we have leaks from the CIA saying that they would do anything to keep the Trump administration from winning the election, right?
Okay. Okay.
We do know that there are people within the CIA who have these sentiments. We also know about the bot farm the CIA had that was making up like a huge portion of Reddit. You can go to our video on that was coming out of like a CIA PSYOP thing, and it was mostly super woke stuff that they were posting. And so I think that there is a faction within some of these government organizations that see their goal as solidifying control of the urban monoculture. And they see, the way that they would see it is, Trump is a dangerous nationalist that is getting a lot of their friends fired right now. So let's stop him, right? Like, he's a direct threat to their jobs and stuff like that, right? Let's stop him. Okay. So they see anything that breaks up the new right coalition as beneficial in attempting that. And I think that the best way to do that is to say, it is okay. It is really wrong what was done to Nick Fuentes to try to keep him from talking about Jews, about Israel aid, about anything like that. But to also understand that Nick Fuentes' faction is in the wrong overall, and is one of the things that we need to address, because they are being used, and even Nick Fuentes recognized this. He said his primary enemy was conservatives, that they are being used to destroy the new conservative movement.
Okay. Fascinating.
But keep in mind what it means, the destruction of the new conservative movement. It means the survivors win and get to execute their will, which you hear about in Mandani and his rap songs.
We're in for a wild ride. Thank you for bringing me up to speed on all this.
There we go.
Okay.
Not that great.
But like people agreed, really enjoyed. Some people suggested we do an episode on mate blocking in general, which I mean, we talk about it a lot. I would have to figure out how to put an interesting angle on it, but I could maybe do that. I think it'd be fun to talk about mate blocking.
Here's
apparently,
my
What If
bigger
I'm Pissed
question
did a
about
really
mate
good mate
blocking.
blocking episode.
What I would do in terms of an episode on mate blocking is mate blocking done intentionally or subconsciously? Because a lot of the times, we'll be like, oh, women are tearing other women down, but do they mean to do it, right? Like, are they telling the fat woman, you look beautiful because they know that it will hurt her chances at getting a partner? Or is there some sort of subconscious play going on? And I guess this would cause you to like soul search and stuff in terms of if you ever did this.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I feel like I've engaged in what amounts to mate blocking behavior without ever intending it because I didn't want to block anyone because I didn't want to mate. So I would lean toward the this isn't a thing camp, but I imagine that there are women who actively engage in mate blocking because they want mates.
Yeah, we haven't discussed it yet, but the Catholics versus Jews episode. We got angry comments from both sides. Like a lot of Jews thought it was anti-Semitic, and a lot of Catholics thought it was anti-Catholic. So that makes me feel like we probably did a fairly good job of. Obviously, whenever you hear something and it's critical of your side to some extent, you're going to feel like it was, just an attack on your side. But yeah, a lot of angry Jews and some angry Catholics.
No, a lot more angry Catholics than angry.
More angry Catholics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people pointed out entirely valid things. Like Catholicism is not as necessarily as anti-capitalist as you would argue. There's a lot of nuance to all of these things. A lot of different histories. The Catholic Church is not a monolith. Blah blah blah. So anyway.
Yeah.
We don't have to get into that.
Well, no. One interesting thing about it that came up in the comments is that. Like why Protestants are often culturally closer to Jewish people than they are to Catholics.
Well, some people have argued that Catholics are closer to Jews than Protestants are.
So the reason I would argue that you see more closeness there and more closeness between groups like Catholics and Mormons is just whether or not you have a centralized religious structure or a decentralized religious structure.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, and again, it really depends on the dimension that you're looking at.
Yeah.
Why are you giving all your candy to Octavian? Look at Octavian's basket. Octavian! Is this what happens when you have an autistic brother who doesn't like eating candy?
Toasty, are you going to eat some of your candy?
No, I don't like it.
Toasty, eat your candy.
Toasty, I'm gonna make you eat your candy.
Look at this.
No, I won't make you.
I got orange, my favorite color.
But did you have fun, Toasty?
Look, this looks so cool. Look at it. It looks so cool. My orange, my favorite color. I'll eat it.
Did you hit me?
No.
He's just doing her thing. Just living her best life.